Before we begin, I want to thank PioCreat for sending me their HALOT-x1 printer to try out on this Kitbash. We'll get into all the details and specifics as well as my thoughts later in the video though, so let's go ahead and jump in. I have always wanted to like the STORMRAVEN gunship. The concept of it is great. This big flying box loaded up with guns, flying into a combat zone and dropping off a whole bunch of shock troops before flying back up in the air to deliver covering fire. I've always thought of the Tartakovsky Clone Wars shorts that feature the ARC troopers, like the one where they get dropped off to go bail out a whole bunch of Jedi from General Grievous. The problem though is that the STORMRAVEN doesn't really live up to that. The shape is just way out of balance, being so front heavy it looks even more brickish than most other Warhammer vehicles. The troop compartment is super small for its capacity, and while that's not exactly out of character for a 40k, it definitely becomes painfully obvious when you grapple a whole dreadnought onto the back. But that's not to say it doesn't have any promise, and I think we might even be able to save this dorky little gunship, albeit with a little bit of help from PioCreat and their HALOT-x1 resin printer. So welcome to GoneHollowMinis, my name is Colt, and today we are building a better STORMRAVEN gunship. Just in time for it to go to Legends. Probably. Okay, first things first, what are we actually going to need to fix on this thing? Well, the first thing is the silhouette. The crew compartment just isn't long enough to me. It's always looked like a cartoon punching bag, so we'll need to extend that. Additionally, I'm not a huge fan of the second canopy back here. This is the servitor-operated turret, which does make sense, but I've never understood why the servitor, who's already linked into the craft sensor array, needs to see out a windshield instead of just using sensors. Another thing I want to change is the Hurricane bolters. These look okay on the Land Raider Crusader, I think, but the big brick of bolters is just a little chunky for a flyer. And then of course we need to make it feel Blood Angels. The base kit already does have a couple of chapter symbols molded onto the sprue, but I mean, come on, we can do better. So we've got a whole laundry list of things to do, and to be entirely honest, my Blood Angel bits are running a little bit dry after so many kit bashes. Luckily, PioCreat came in with just the solution I needed. This is the PioCreat HALOT-x1 with the combo automatic feed unit. PioCreat sent me this to try out on this kit bash, and we are gonna put it through its paces. Getting the HALOT-x1 unboxed, the first thing that stuck out to me was how easy the setup was. I'm a hobbyist creative type. Crunchy numbers and technical setup are not my thing. So I wanted to see how the HALOT-x1 performed for someone like me. Someone who's got enough experience with resin printing to get stuff done, but still is kind of lost when it comes to all the super crunchy technical stuff. It gets said a lot in Warhammer circles that resin printing is a hobby unto itself, but I don't think it always has to be. While we should absolutely all understand our tools to the best of our abilities, if we're buying something like a resin 3D printer to augment our Warhammer experience, it shouldn't come with an entirely new hobby that we're obligated to take part in. Which is why I was glad to see that the setup for the HALOT-x1 is completely trouble-free. Everything snaps or clamps together snugly but easily. In fact, the only time I needed to mess with screws was to install the little shelf that the automatic feed unit sits on when not in use. Everything else just clamped right in. After a little while of plugging everything in, I just needed to fill the vat, and even that was nice and easy. PioCreat sent me the combo option of this printer, which comes with an automatic feeding unit. This just includes a little sensor unit that gets installed in the printer, and this exterior pump that works with PioCreat brand resin bottles. Like the HALOT-x1 itself, this is pretty much plug and play. Attach the cable, swap the lids on your resin, plug the adapter in, and you're off. Just switch on automatic feeding when you start your print and you're good to go. The RFID chip in the bottom of PioCreat's resin bottles interacts directly with the AFU, meaning you don't have to manually change your settings and parameters each time you change resins. This bottom section of the AFU also weighs your bottle at the same time, so you always know how much you have left. The AFU just really does make dealing with resin not only quicker, but cleaner. You can easily tell it to drain the vat if you need to clean it or swap resins. It doesn't drain it all of the way just due to how the pump spout works, but it gets you most of the way there. And the vat itself has one of the best pour spouts I have seen on a printer. Compared to other printers I've used that either just don't have a spout or have only a tiny little divot, having a whole spout molded into the vat is hugely appreciated. The AFU also heats the resin, at least as it pumps it. There's no vat heater on this printer, which is definitely unfortunate, but at least being able to control the temperature of the resin you're pumping is nice. But once I'd figured out how the AFU works, I went ahead and did the first test print, a massive nightly dude that came with the printer's included USB drive. Keep in mind, when I say I set up the HALOT-x1 and immediately got to printing, I mean it. There was no messing with leveling, no fussing with calibration, just make sure everything was connected and we were good to go. One of the biggest boasts that the HALOT-x1 makes is that it's 100% leveling free. Most other resin printers have a stationary vat that the build plate lowers into, but the HALOT-x1 swaps that. The 10-inch LCD screen and the entire vat are what move on this printer, meaning that your build plate can remain 100% stationary. No leveling, no fussing, just place it into the brackets and it'll get clamped tight when you start your print. And yeah, so far that advertising seems accurate. I haven't had any issues with leveling or calibration at all. The test model came out really well straight out of the box. The file is liberally supported, and I got a little too excited in pulling that support material off, so the little divots and imperfections are mostly my fault. Still though, this is pretty impressive for a first print on something that I unboxed and set up in the span of like 45 minutes. But now that we got this brand new printer set up, let's go ahead and put it through its paces. See, I wanted to do this specific project with this printer because it kind of runs the gamut of resin printing for kit bashing. We've got large flat panels for the fuselage extension, a lot of really intricate and finely detailed decoration bits, and a couple tricky elements that we'll get to when we come to the base. Basically, I wanted to see what the HALOT can actually do. So let's start with the hull extension. These files can be found on Thingiverse by Captain Magpie. They do come unsupported though, so I loaded them up in ChichuBox to take care of that. After supporting everything, I was actually able to fit all 4 hull pieces onto one build plate, which definitely makes things easier. I'm still not the best at supporting things though, and I had my raft settings wrong. Whoops, that's on me. Luckily, the HALOT's build plate has a really unique self-releasing design that made it really easy to get rid of all of my mistakes. Just twist the handles and these rectangular sections retract, breaking the seal on your rafts and making it a lot easier to remove your prints, successful ones or otherwise. This is probably my favorite feature of this printer, which sounds a little silly given everything that it can do, I understand, but I've always hated having to scrape at my build plate just to release stuck-on prints. With this build plate, it's literally as simple as twisting the handles. Even if your parts are too big to come off cleanly in one go, this does give you a nice easy place to work a scraper into to pry the rest of the print off. While we're talking about the build plate, it is worth mentioning that the nature of this design leads to these little ridges where the resin meets the plate. Not a huge issue if it's on a raft, but if you're printing a base or something, make sure to add a little bit of height so that you can sand it back down flush. I think the auto-release function is definitely worth the hassle, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. Other than that though, these fuselage pieces turned out great. Once I got the support cleaned up, everything lined up nice and neat, and all of the panel lining came out really crisp. Just as crisp as the plastic kit we're building off of. Speaking of, now we can go ahead and get to building our STORMRAVEN. The very front of the vehicle is basically the same. So go ahead and build it up until you get to this point. Just don't attach the rear door just yet. Here we can assemble the extension. There's keys on these parts to help you get everything nice and square. After that, it literally just slots in behind the plastic section that we've already built. Yep, it's that easy. There's a little bit of gap filling to do later, but that's no big deal. At this point, we can also attach the rear door, and now we're getting somewhere. Now, one other thing I want to change about the STORMRAVEN is how all of the weapons are arrayed on this model. I'm not the biggest Hurricane Bolter fan, so those need to get moved. Even though we're already modeling for disadvantage, if we're being entirely honest, I do want this thing to be at least fairly WYSIWYG. So we're going to relocate a few things. The STORMRAVEN can be loaded up with a front-mounted weapon, I'm choosing the Melta option, a turret-mounted weapon, I'm choosing las cannons, 2 Hurricane Bolters, and a missile rack. The front weapons don't need to change, but we're going to relocate the others. See, since we've extended the hull so much, placing the turret where it's supposed to go just looks a little awkward. So instead, we're going to kind of emulate the Thunderhawk a bit, scooching this air intake part back. I also like the idea of the turret being remotely operated by an interior servitor as opposed to one actually being in the canopy. So we're going to flip that turret piece around, scrape out some of the interior, and mount our las cannons in what's normally the back. I'm using a larger pair from a field ordnance battery kit, but the ones from the STORMRAVEN would work perfectly fine. Later, I just filled the hole in with a bit of plasticard and some hatch-looking greebles. The Hurricane Bolters are going to replace the wing-mounted missile launchers. I'm going to carefully cut some of these bolters away from the main section, trim and sand them down a bit to fit beneath the wing, and glue them in place. While we're talking about the wings, keep in mind that we'll have to make some modifications in order to get them to fit. This little trapezoid piece here is supposed to connect to the tail fin, but we've extended that section quite a bit. So I'm going to saw these off and replace them where they should be going. This bulks out the transition from our resin-printed hull to our more slender tail section, and lets our wings fit as they should. But finally, for the missing missiles, I'm going to use some spare Malleus rocket pods, also from the field ordnance battery. I attached these together so that they matched the size of the STORMRAVEN, then glued these under the wings as well. Okay, so that's the structural and gameplay parts of the Kitbash out of the way, but to make it feel more Blood Angel Z-y, we're gonna need a lot more decorations. We are kind of known for over-designing everything after all. But this does give us a chance to see how the HALOT-x1 can handle really fine, intricate detail. So I scrounged the internet for some Blood Angel-y looking bits. Wings, vampire-looking swords, chapter symbols, whole 9 yards. I wanted to see how these small details came out on the HALOT-x1, and tried to find a good variety of things to test it out with. After a storm of applying, editing, and redoing supports, I had my prints ready to go, and the HALOT-x1 had its next challenge. We didn't get to see it when we were printing the massive fuselage sections, but the HALOT-x1 has a unique way of breaking up its 10-inch 16K resolution screen into different zones. 92 zones to be exact. The printer can detect which zones are actually needed for any given print, only powering those specific areas. This not only cuts down on overexposure, but also helps to prolong the life of your LCD screen, which is definitely appreciated. I did have a couple more failures in this process, but that largely came back down to my raft settings. See, given the topography of the build plate, I found that I needed to make my rafts a little bit thicker than I normally do. That's pretty easy to do in pretty much any slicer, but it's worth keeping in mind. Once I got that worked out and all of my bits cured, I could finally get them on the model, and not gonna lie, I'm pretty impressed. The printer I had been using is, venerable at this point, so I'm used to some pixelization and faint details. Comparing that to what I could get out of the HALOT-x1 is seriously night and day. One of the parts that surprised me the most were these frescoes I printed for the wings. The smooth edges around the hood and arms and even the upturned corners of the robe came out really well rendered, without any layer lines or visible artifacts. But frankly, all of these parts looked great. The window sections on the larger wings look super crisp, the shallow bevels and intricate crossguards of these swords are perfect, and even the tiny little wings on these chapter symbols are perfectly sharp. And again, most of this printing is done pretty much straight out of the box too. Other than figuring out my raft thickness and adjusting some of the time between my layers, I haven't had to touch leveling, calibration, or anything like that. I'm sure that if I did, I could refine my results even more, but I think that this is the exact kind of thing that hobbyists like me are looking for. We want to open up brand new tabletop hobby experiences, not just add another layer of technical complexity to our hobby. All of that just gets in the way of us actually being able to kit bash, build, and paint our armies. But I had one last test in mind for the HALOT-x1. For the base, I want to do a kind of industrial complex manufactorum thing. This is just a whole bunch of random bits. Armor panels, leftover gun barrels, things like that. Most of these are from the Baneblade sprues, but you can get creative with it. You'll notice that I'm trying to stay away from recognizable in-scale details, things that miniatures would interact with, control panels, levers, things like that. That's because I want to try for a bit of a forced perspective thing with the base. This is a flyer after all, so I want to give the impression that it's flying higher than the tabletop allows us to show. This base looks okay already, I think, kind of like an alleyway through a manufactorum complex. To really put this into context though, we'll need some recognizable but tiny details. Behold, the tiniest tank you ever did see. This is a roughly epic scale tank that, you guessed it, I printed on the HALOT-x1. And like, come on, how could I not be impressed with the detail on this tiny thing? The side hatches, the wiring on the rear, and even the individual track links all came out really crisp for the size. Once we have a few of these though, we can set them up on our base, making sure to leave room for our flight stand. This tiny armored column puts the rest of our base into context, and I think it sells the effect pretty well. I could have tried to find some epic scale guardsmen too, but to be honest, my fingers already cramp when I'm painting regular scale guardsmen. And that's about where I called kit bashing complete for this project. Painting is already underway, as I'm sure you saw in the thumbnail, but I wasn't able to get this fully painted up between learning the printer and getting this behemoth built. Typical Warhammer YouTuber things, I know. Here you can see just how much 3D printing helped with this project. I've talked about it a little bit in previous videos, but I think this is the best way to incorporate resin printing into our hobby. Being able to print whole models is amazing, don't get me wrong, and I definitely have quite a few that I'll be printing on this printer. But I prefer to use it as a tool for new opportunities in the kit bashing process that I already love. And just to sign off, my honest thoughts on the HALOT-x1. I actually really like this printer. I've gone on about how easy it is to set up and use, and I stand by that. Things like the auto-release bed, automatic feed unit, and even just how the front door lifts up instead of needing to be entirely removed makes the HALOT-x1 one of the more accessible printers of its caliber, which I really appreciate. But beyond those creature comforts, the HALOT-x1 performs. The detail that the 16K ultra high-res screen gives you is incredibly crisp and holds detail even at small scales. There were a few hangups though. Some of the English translation is a little bit wonky and the instruction manuals are brief, though there are supplementary videos included with the USB. At the moment, the HALOT-x1 standard is on sale for $600 US, but I really have been impressed with what this printer can do. It's straightforward, easy to use, and capable of really impressive detail. But again, the ease of use is the thing that I really want to highlight for us hobbyists. The less time we spend fiddling over our 3D printers, the more time we can spend actually doing the hobby we love. And the HALOT-x1, I feel, finds the perfect balance between being user-friendly and being capable of producing high-quality and fine detail prints. If you've liked what you've seen so far of this printer, check out the description for a link to take you to the HALOT-x1. Give a look for yourself and I think you'll be just as impressed as I was. But that takes us to the end of this kit bash. I am actually really happy with what I was able to do with this kit. It's been on my to-do list for quite some time, so I'm glad I finally had the excuse to go ahead and check it off. Thank you all so much for watching, I really hope you enjoyed. One last thank you to PioCreat for sending me this printer to review on this kit bash. If you enjoyed or found this video helpful, why not leave a like? If you have any feedback, feel free to drop a comment, subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss the next kit bash, and until we meet again friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow.